for all intents and purposes, this is the meeting of the minds of software engineers. And every single one of us within our day-to-day, or at least sprint to sprint, have to work with product managers. And product managers in any organization have a roadmap with features that they have to meet. And when they engineer and architect the roadmap, some of it's a combination of like new features, bug fixes. Some of it is, updating features. We call it suck left features. Nothing really very innovative. It's just we got to improve some features. And some of it, frankly, are just like deal blockers, right? So if you're in B2B SaaS, for example, you just have to unblock some deals. So they're revenue generating. But as a product manager, and by the way, for the record, I used to be one at App Dynamics. I brought a few of their products to market. So I'm no stranger to that song and dance between R&D and hundreds of salespeople trying to hit their commissions by, the end of the quarter. Or if you're in the consumer space, you have consumers and competition. If you're a public company, you have a stock price you're trying to keep as high as possible. Nonetheless, software engineers are trying to constantly make a decision between getting features out the door as fast as possible, while maintaining technical code and architectural integrity of the code base that they are the custodians of. Okay, so that's the premise of today's workshop. And I have some questions that I've also lined up here that I'm going to be chatting with Mark and Rishi about. Anyway, I'll pause there. Any questions about today's topic? All right, cool. Well, let's jump in. So I'll open up the floor. First question for Mark, and I'm going to ask the same question to you, Rishi, as well. Tell me a time where you had to make a decision between getting a feature out the door because you had a strict business deadline and having to sacrifice. What did you sacrifice? What happened? What was the scenario? Walk us through it.
Yeah, there is a recent one that comes to mind at another company. And it was actually one of the drivers that you almost mentioned, but didn't, where as a public company, you often take part in these like analyst days with these groups like Gartner and Forrester. And so there's an element of first selling to the analysts and positioning your product that's just about to come out the door in a way that qualifies you to be in whatever quadrant you need to be in to be recognized and get headlines. And it's uniquely difficult in a SaaS business where you're providing software as a service, because in most of these SaaS businesses, the engineers are also the operations team. So they feel very acutely the trade-off between getting something out and the benefits of that, like being able to actually get feedback, know whether you're built something that's worthwhile, and then recognize revenue and hype and buzz and increase stock price. The trade-off between that and then inevitably getting the first call in the middle of the night and having to service that because the software isn't as good as it would be if you had more time. And so I can't say a ton about it, but I can say that these, like the Gartners and the Forresters of the world, have certain criteria as far as how developed your software can be in terms of whether it's GA, production, alpha, beta, in the way that they'll cover it. So they really want things to be GA. And so there's a tension there to say things are GA or not, and to maybe change the goalposts of what GA means. And so that obviously comes at the expense of features and quality. So it's not only customers, a lot of times there's a lot of middlemen involved in that decision making as well.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Mark. I think that's a really great insight. I think the question is when was the last time that you had to sacrifice certain things because something that has to be bumped up in terms of the priority? Obviously the prioritization, it's a really, really big topic, and maybe we can just spend this entire hour just talking about it. Mm-hmm. The reality that is that we have to take some of these decisions all the time. And especially if you have been involved in some of these hyper growth companies, there are times where you receive a request and that you cannot say no. Those requests have to be moved up in the priority. Now, the best thing that you can do is recognize that proactively and build that as an important component of your prioritization framework. And so the one other thing that I used to do, when I'm heading this product and heading the engineering is, apart from the other elements, there is a risk element, which is always part of the prioritization, and it could be related to the market risk, it could be the technical risk, it could be the risk from the customer, because unless you deliver certain features, the customer is going to churn, or maybe you lose the quarter, because the certain feature could not be delivered on time. So you just have to take that into account, and then you just make a decision. Now, one important thing is that there is nothing comes for free. And so if at all you're moving something up in the priority, if you're taking up, then obviously something else has to move down. And so if you have the right framework, then everyone understands what exactly is going on. Now, just to the specific question, I have taken those decisions so many times. The one of the most interesting one that I can remember, back in days driving to San Francisco to the Harness, and I received a call, and on the phone, I'm making a decision that okay, this particular feature is going to prioritize as this part of the feature, as part of the sprint cycle, and we are going to deliver this particular feature because one of the major customers, they needed it, and without that, we couldn't get the deal done. And so receiving the request directly from the head of sales, and something Rishi, I just need it badly. So again, there are so many instances that I can cite of it. It just has to be part of this entire process.
You guys ever go to a restaurant and you see on the menu some restaurants, or maybe there's a meme or something going around where it says like you can get your food fast, you can get it cheap, or you can get it good, but you can only pick two, right? I feel like feature development, or at least software development, is kind of the same way, right? Where you can't have everything. So my next question for you is, let's say there's a feature demand, and if it was up to you, you would spend 2 months doing this right, okay? But you have 2 weeks, and it has to be in production in 2 weeks. What are you willing to sacrifice? You have to sacrifice something. What are you willing to sacrifice to get that out the door? And what are you not willing to sacrifice, and why?
I think the answer first depends on the type of company and industry that you're in. In that, like, if you're an internet infrastructure where the main value is reliability, well, then you certainly can't sacrifice on quality. You may sacrifice on functionality. But if you're providing a thing that, hey, if it only works 50% of the time, it's still a huge boon. Like in the medical world of like, hey, this drug, let's say that a drug has very few adverse events, but also like fairly low efficacy. But when it works, it cures cancer. Well, then you're willing to make that compromise and get things out there, provided the adverse events are low. So, with Makaru, for example, it's not part of a company's like critical path. They're not using it to serve traffic. If Makaru goes down for 5 minutes, they're not losing revenue. At best or at worst, it's an interruption to their CI/CD pipeline if they're using the APIs to integrate with their testing. So in that sense, I can be more risky and focus on features and functionality at the expense of some blips in quality, because it's not in the critical path for that customer. But in other jobs, like working for a CDN, it's the total opposite. It's like going down is a catastrophe for any amount of time. And so that is the highest value above all others.
Yeah, just add on to what Mark said. I think, obviously it depends on the type of industry that you're targeting, the type of application that you're dealing with. I'll share some insight based on my experience that I had, at Harness. The Harness is one of the leader in this, software delivery space, with the product for the CI/CD. And it is the critical part. It's a really critical component within the organization. If your CI/CD things are not working, then your entire development is going to be stuck because they're not able to deliver the code in the various environment, including the production. And so, if you have, if you're really, you know, you know, if you have a really task that you have to deliver certain things, within the span of a week or the 2 weeks, if you've been put under pressure, and by the way, that shouldn't be the case. I think there is something wrong with this whole the product management, the project management business that you get to the scenario where you put yourself in this kind of problem where you have to deliver in such a short span of time, and you don't have any other choice. But let's say if you do it, then the things that I would never compromise is the security. The things that I would not compromise is the reliability. I have ended up compromising the experience, to some extent. I have been very, very careful about creating the boundary, where this feature starts and where it ends, and so that there is no one is under a different impression. The things that I would be really, really, be careful about, what is going to be the follow up after 1 week or the 2 week time frame that you start with. And so, again, it's a never an easy task, sharing more from the software engineer's perspective that you have to get these things done. But as a software engineer, I would be really, really careful about, creating this, the boundary, where this feature starts, where it ends, and not end up creating the mess that that becomes a bigger problem.
So we all have mental models that we use to make very efficient decisions, or at least quick decisions, as efficiently as possible. My wife and I have this agreement where whenever we question spending money, we don't go cheap in two areas. Anything that has to do with health or anything that has to do with education, we're willing to say, okay, this is not somewhere we're willing to go cheap. If it doesn't fall in those two categories, then yes, go as cheap as possible. Like, you're not going to find me in designer sneakers or something, right? For like $2,000. So these types of heuristics and litmus tests, do you have any where if somebody does put pressure on you, and Mark, you kind of mentioned a few of those, which is like, well, the system can't go down in production, right? So like, no, I can't compromise there. But I want a more specific answer. Like, what about the internal components of the system, or the impact on the team, or the tech debt that it might, whatever, anything? Do you have those types of litmus tests, or some kind of guardrail to help you decide quickly whether or not you're willing to say, yes, I'll get you that feature in 2 weeks, or absolutely not, we need 2 months to build this correctly?
I have a set of principles that I set out with when I built Makaru. There was almost a reaction to other jobs I've had, because Makaru was a solo thing, so I can control it and do whatever the heck I want with it and adhere to principles stubbornly if I want to. And one of them was simply around whether or not to build a feature. And I call it like the no snowflakes principle, which is basically like nothing can be built for a single customer, no matter how much they're offering. That everything must be done in service of a market, of multiple customers. That's what I wanted the business to be. I did not want the business to be make 5 ugly compromises and live with them forever, but every one of them brings in some massive enterprise deal. I wanted it to be a very sustainable business, and I wanted the comfort of having thousands and thousands and thousands of paying users rather than 5 huge whale accounts, and the pressure that hangs over you every day. So Makaru is more of a lifestyle business, but it's been a wonderful lifestyle business from that standpoint because of that principle, being able to decide and say, hey, I take feature requests all the time, because a lot of the best guidance for where the market is going come from the users, but everything is always through the lens of, can I envision 50% of my users saying, yes, this is a great idea, go do that. And if I can, then I go do it. If it's one big company waving a crazy salad spinner in my direction, no, I won't go do it.
I'm reminded of, I think it's Jason Fried, one of the co-founders of 37 Signals Basecamp. He wrote a book called Rework. And in there's a whole chapter where they talk about underdoing the competition, where it's like you're always competing, right? But it's like some competitor comes out with like 20 more features, and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to be doing that to compete with you. And if we have customers that are saying, hey, we want these extra features, we're willing to say, no, we are just not that software. And if you maybe you just outgrew us, you can go to the competitor. But they knew their market position very, very well, very comfortably. And that, I love it. That's a fantastic example as to, a really good heuristic to be able to say yes or no to a feature.
Yeah, yeah, and totally. And I think that is an exercise that the product managers or the business stakeholders have to do it almost for every request. That how do you align the individual customer request with the long term, the product vision or the platform vision that you have created for yourself. And if it's not aligning well, then there's something wrong. Maybe you should take a different path. But then, even the requests which are aligned that can literally overwhelm you. Really, depends on the use cases and depends on the different companies. The number of requests that you start getting, could be huge. And you do need some help. You do need a, way to handle the number of requests in a more methodical way. Of course, like kind of support together this different discussion about the product prioritization and the feature prioritization and those things. I used to do that. I used to have like, this kind of generic framework where I would almost assign the customer value to almost every feature request. And so, depending on the number of customers, which is requesting that particular feature, you can count on that. Maybe you can start giving some specific weightage to this feature request, depending on the recurring revenue or, what were the things that you have started with. And then there is the huge the weightage that you give, like, how well aligned it is for your long-term product vision. And so, let's not forget the fact that, in the today's modern fast-paced kind of environment, the product vision or the platform vision itself is not necessarily a fixed, or it's not written in stone, and it's a constantly evolving thing. And so you give some weightage, about, how these features is going to benefit, many of the customers or many of the prospects who have not yet signed yet, for you, and they could potentially start leveraging that. And then there's something like, the risk, like, what is the risk that you have that you're not, if you don't do it, then, how it's going to create a, the negative effect for you. And the final thing is that, it's really the cost associated with it. So in order for you to, build a certain feature, there is a certain amount of the resource that you have to spend on. And so, do you have a capacity? Do you have enough resource to take that feature and start executing right away, or something that you want to defer it? You want to hear more number of customers, the more, the feedback, before you want to take up. So again, every company is different, but, I would say, as a product manager, as an engineering manager, I think there is just some kind of framework that has to be there, for these feature requests to take it up and, make sure it's strategically aligned. And so that, you don't build something which is unnecessary just for one customer, but at the same time, you build something that benefits most of the customers.
Okay, so there's a mental model. It's kind of the opposite of this, but you guys probably heard of the tragedy of the commons. This is kind of the opposite, which is like doing what's best for the greater populace versus, the top 1% or whatever.
Yep.
There's definitely a phrase for this. It's not coming to me right now. But look, there's a hot topic, all right? Technical debt. Okay, agree or disagree? Is technical debt inevitable?
Like, in practice, yes. I'm searching for a more theoretical answer, but I've never not encountered a significant and ever-growing amount of technical debt.
Yeah, it's like this, right? Even if you give every damn resource in the world to all the engineers, there will still be the technical debt, because there will be the new learning. The same, engineers, who took off their time, and they will come back that I would like to redo the same thing in a different way. So it's inevitable, for sure.
So we agree technical debt is inevitable. So here's a very controversial question. In your experience, what kind of technical debt did you incur that you regret? And what kind of technical debt that you incur that maybe wasn't so bad?
I will get philosophical about it. Mark, do you want to go and answer this question?
No, you go first. Let me think about it.
The few things that I really, regret is not emphasizing enough about the quality. And, you'll regret in future. That's what I can tell you. And it happens almost like at the most places, especially, if you are in a hyper growth stage, the number of customer requests, the amount of requests that you get from your sales team, it can easily overwhelm. And I think that's when, you start making the choices. Okay, let's move forward, let's ship this particular feature and we'll come back and we'll address the quality part later on. And this will eventually accumulate into this massive technical debt. And, what gets you going, makes you agile and nimble will be totally lost. And so that's a one thing, I always regret on it. I think, it happens almost every engineering leaders and they end up regretting it. Sometimes,
Can you be more specific? Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, cut you off.
And I was going to be more specific about it could be, again, it could be making some of the design and architectural choices, because you'll have to invest more, in order for you to build a better product. And many times as simple as investing more resources to have a better coverage, the quality coverage. Because the more coverage, the better you are covered from the quality standpoint, that gives you the flexibility that you can make the changes as frequently as you want. And you rely on your quality friend that if there is something wrong going on, if you're making certain changes accidentally, your quality friend is going to raise an alarm and, it will help you cover before it's too late, right? And so that's the one part, I would always prioritize. That's the one learning of that. So
if you have to sacrifice good architecture for speed, is test coverage a safety harness or a safety net? It's like, hey, look, I can't build, like, if it was up to me, I would have probably built the most beautiful class that I could possibly could, and just design this feature in a way that will scale for the next 10 years. But I can't, and it's crappy, and the code isn't the greatest. But I have some pretty good test coverage that I built just as a safety precaution. Let's get it out the door. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, to some extent, yes. I think definitely, if you have a good coverage, then it's going to help you some of the the major flow or the major functionality that you have already built, and if at all that is breaking because of your changes. See, ultimately, it all comes down to the fact that if you are trying to be agile, you are making changes more frequently. You are touching your production more often. More often that you touch your production, that means that you can create a problem in the production environment often. And the only way that you can prevent it if you have a good quality coverage. So no matter what are the choices at the design and architecture level comes, then the quality is your friend. That's what is going to protect you. Now, when it comes to the architectural choices, I think the impact is much bigger than this immediate feature delivery. I think if you don't make the right design and architectural choices, I think you will be limited in the future. You might not be able to scale the product. You might have there's 100 different problems. So yeah, I think in order for you to be successful, you have to be keep making the right choices, and probably sometimes taking these calls where you have to deliver certain things in a week or in a short in a 2-week kind of time frame has to be revisited probably as soon as possible, even if you don't do it right away.
Thank you, Rashid. Mark, same question. Technical
Yeah.
debt. What was regrettable? What was not regrettable? Or at least not so bad?
The most regrettable ones are the choices that add significant ongoing complexity to the way you have to think about your system. Like, to be concrete, one that I regret, although I think maybe when I go full time with Makaru, I'll fix it, is that Makaru Enterprise runs in Docker and Makaru on the cloud doesn't. That may seem like a dumb decision, but it is a decision out of austerity of time, I would say, that I always prioritize other things over, harmonizing that architecture. So whenever I have to make an update to Makaru Enterprise, it takes a bit longer. And there are some edge cases where I would have already pushed that update out to Makaru Cloud and it would be fine. So having to have that like split brain personality when you design an architecture, but you have an asterisk on it, which is, well, in this case, it works a completely different way, and having to maintain that mentally over time, that's where I find the most pain. Where I actually find the least pain is around not staying current with the latest libraries. Like, for example, I'm big into front-end development, and in the last 10 years of front-end JavaScript, the comings and goings of frameworks, a new framework a day was a joke for a while, put just this immense peer pressure on engineering leaders to stay current, to keep their staff happy so that their resumes are fresh, to feel like they're not falling behind, to keep the aesthetics of their application looking current. And a while ago, I think a few years ago, I started to make peace with like, I'm going to pick a version of a thing, and then I'm going to stick with it for a while. And I'm going to wind up being several versions behind. Like, for example, right now, Makaru uses Material UI, which is a library I love, but it's a significantly older version than the current version of Material UI. And I've made it a point to not care about that, to continue developing on that old version of the library, because I find that actually doesn't create that much pain for me at all. It's the architectural decisions that create the pain. There's just this like unnecessary peer pressure to stay current. And if you can just get rid of that, then I think you can cut to what's most valuable, which is making the system sustainable for you, and then also making it a thing that gives your users a lot of value.
So thank you both for your answer. I was having coffee with a friend of mine. His name is Jared. He's a director of engineering at Yahoo. And we were just randomly talking about work, and I was like, hey man, like I remember visiting Yahoo's offices in Sunnyvale. It was like 10 years ago. And they were at the time probably the largest Node.js deployment in the whole world. They actually converted their entire front end facing applications to Node.js. So I was like, did you guys continue on that path? Or and he kind of laughed. He's like, well, first of all, he's like, chasing that dream of modernizing your application is a fool's errand. What very quickly happened in the last, I don't know how many years, is that every time you look at rebuilding or re-architecting something, or even recoding it in a whole different language, the business always wins, because they have demands, and you cannot make a business case to say, oh, this is a PHP stack application. We need to rebuild this thing in Ruby, or rebuild it in Node.js, or Golang, or something else that's more modern. Because whatever decision you're making architecturally might benefit the morale of the engineering team, but it has absolutely zero impact to the consumer. And if there's no impact on the consumer, it has no impact on the share price, which immediately is like the trump card. So what you end up having consequently is what used to be good architecture 15, 20, even 25 years ago is now an application that's sitting there that has to be maintained. The best you can do is update like the runtime, right? And maybe even the libraries, or if you're using like a third-party framework, you better hope to God that framework is not end of life, because now you have to maintain that open source project and take over and do all the security, patches. Otherwise, you will have to rebuild. So like that's the conundrum I'm noticing a lot of people finding themselves in, which is a good transition to my next question. As heads of engineering, how do you negotiate with your product manager to say, hey, look, the entire roadmap that you want me to build this quarter can't just be all net new features. I need some balance between, bug fixes, fixing old technical debt, or just re-architecture. So how much, first of all, do you negotiate that balance? And what is that balance? 50-50, 80-20?
Yeah, I think in a healthy situation, product is eager to recognize that there is value both in reliability and in new functionality, and have some system, however vague, of valuing those two aspects, respectively. And so then as an engineering leader, you really just have to advocate for those things that don't directly affect those two axes, which is things that help keep your velocity high or improve velocity and thus drive down the cost of, building new things. That's probably the easier one to sell. And then the harder one to sell is engineering retention and the morale of the team, which is a factor, because especially if you're running a SaaS business, retaining those key people that know how to keep the business running is a thing you have to solve for in reality. If you lose critical mass of knowledge, that will have ripple effects in quality, but only after the fact. You'll be too late to fix them by the time you get there. So probably that's the hardest thing to sell, and where you really need to excel as an engineering leader is being able to advocate for that while also understanding that it's a balance between that and the business.
Yeah,
Good argument, yeah.
I just saw it in that. I think, again, it really depends on the culture of the organization. I think, most of the healthy, culture, I think there is an explicit recognition for both the product and engineering. There is the product vision, there are a bunch of requests that comes from the customers and from the prospects, and you would like to align and you want to execute on that. But there is also a platform vision that comes from the engineering team. And so the engineering team is also investing in some amount of resources, preparing themselves so that they can be better, more efficient in taking the more number of the customer requests, or executing on the product vision. And so, once you have the complete transparency, if there is a buy-in from the product and from the engineering on that, and you can always allocate certain resources. In my experience, I always try to keep at least the 20% of the time, just always investing into either the technical depth or investing into, some kind of the foundational technologies that engineering teams want, so that they can be better prepared for taking up any of the projects. Because what happens is, you cannot get to the point where, you stand still now, you are not able to, evolve your product any further, because now you have to invest so much into this, the platform business. So that's something, engineering team has to be proactively, prioritizing it and, doing things. So again, it's always a balance that you're trading. I have also seen the scenario where, sometimes the engineering team becomes more maintenance heavy quarter. And so maybe the 50% of their resources going more to the technical depth or the foundational technology, rather than executing on the product manager's request. But that's, there is no, silver bullet, it's a constant negotiation. The most important thing is, it's a complete transparency where the product engineering both recognizes, each other's vision and, how it's really aligned to be successful in the long
term. So 10, 15 years ago, this is a new question. Thank you both. 10, 15 years ago, or actually it doesn't really matter when, software engineering just as a paradigm kind of goes through these different phases where whatever phase it's in, there's a whole new bottleneck. So one of the phases could have been our production environment is massively suffering and we don't know how. So it's this is the early teens, even the between 2000 and 2010, where diagnosing bugs in production was the hot topic, and that was a big issue. But the world solved for that. The next phase that the industry went through was all right, well, we gotta get features out the door as fast as possible, right? So CI/CD was kind of solved for. Matter of fact, Rishi himself personally actually, is a huge contributor to solving that by inventing and building Harness. What phase are we in right now that you consider a bottleneck for software engineers?
One, I think because of the changes in interest rates, keeping costs low and money isn't cheap anymore. And AWS, when it first came out, was kind of a boon. It was perceived as a much cheaper way of building and scaling software. AWS isn't that cheap anymore. They play a real shell game when it comes to costs. So I just notice a lot of the chatter in my Twitter sphere is around, exiting the cloud or finding alternatives to the big cloud providers, finding ingenious ways to keep costs low. It seems that now because we've embraced the cloud, now we're dealing with the follow-on effects of it's a really easy way to spend a lot of money really fast. And then I think also another one is just grappling with the combination of to work from home or not to work from home, hybrid work environments and global work environments. And just like, there's a lot of different macro choices for culture for an engineering team, or how to build a company, whether you're going to be entirely asynchronous as a company and everything is done through written word and Jira tickets, or the total opposite extreme of, hey, you're all in the same office and you can bang out things on a whiteboard, and everything in between. Like some companies are entirely remote, but they do everything over video conference and they're constantly huddling with one another, versus companies that are spread across 10 different time zones where they have to embrace everything is asynchronous and written in email and Jira tickets. So that it feels like the early days of us figuring out patterns to solve those things. And it's been, forced on a lot of people by COVID and the after effects of the pandemic.
So your opinion is a lot of it is almost like socio-political and economical. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's a snowballing of effects. Like, for example, everybody always wants costs to be lower so profits are higher. And so for a long time, companies have been offshoring some or all of their developments. That had the after effect of a lot of other places in the world getting very good at development. And so it no longer are you just offshoring the parts you don't want to do. If you can manage to build a global company, you get the pick of the best people anywhere, but that brings with it its own problems. And it's a fast enough evolving world that the sociological patterns haven't evolved fast enough to compensate for it, I think, yet. And there's new tools needed.
Yeah, it's fair. Rishi, same question. What do you consider as like the bottleneck that the software world is in right now?
Yeah, it's just, I was really listening to what Mark was saying. I think, everything, that was making sense. I just doubled down on that. And so, what he's pointed out is, so correct. Like, there was a time where everyone is going out to the cloud. Why? Because, it's so efficient. You can make entire team, much more productive. But then there is a side effect of it. The same thing goes, there was a time where a lot of companies were doing the outsourcing. Why? Because now you don't necessarily have to worry so much about having the resources. You can get the, the overall cost down. But then there is a certain side effect. There is it has an effect on your internal, innovation and other things. And again, the same topic where you can including here at the Sapient, where we can build a team all around the world. We can hire folks who can work remotely. It's really amazing that how easy it is to attract some of the top talent in a short span of time. So I can really build a team, but then there are certain side effects, there are certain inefficiencies that comes with it. And so, there is a next round of the companies that are going to build around that, how you can facilitate some of the things that was blessing for the software development, how you can govern and make it more, more streamlined, and, remove some of the inefficiencies that, that comes with it. So for example, there are the companies that are spending significant amount of time on the, the cloud cost. The going back from the cloud to having your own, the data center is not an option. Maybe, some company might be doing it, and, probably that's short-sighted approach. But, if you just dig deeper and try to analyze why the cost has gone high, because the cloud providers are like the infinite pool of resources. And now, if you give a control, if you empower your developers, they can easily go overboard. They end up creating, so much of a cloud resources that it becomes very, very expensive. And so there has to be some kind of process, some kind of tools that can, help, the better govern and make it more efficient. So there is always like a shifting balance. I think it's just there are times where people are going after the cloud adoption. Like there are times where people are going away, and now the new things will evolve that will keep that in balance.
Alrighty, so I know we're coming close to time here, and I feel like we covered a lot of really good topics. So I kind of want to sum it up in a nutshell. So the premise of today's workshop was, how can software engineers stay ahead of feature requests? If you don't stay ahead of feature requests, what ends up happening is you got to cut corners, you incur technical debt, you crush your employee morale. But there are some key ways that you can stay in front of feature requests, or at least keep up the speed that you both shared. How would you summarize your wish list? If a product manager came to you today and said, "Hey Rishi, hey Mark, you're like 50 features that I need to have built in the next like 3 months," right? Before you say yes, you say, "All right, well, Mr. and Mrs. Product Manager, here's how I can make that happen." What is it that you would communicate to that product manager?
I'll let Rishi take that one first.
I'm sorry, Mark, you want to? I'm sorry.
No, I'm delegating to you on that one.
So I think before we go into like how you can take this 50 the feature request first, one thing that I would like to emphasize is that as an engineering team, the key to success lies in their preparedness. And so any point of time, when you are talking about building new features, building enhancement, doing the bug fixes, there are usually like those 3 steps, like you build this feature, you develop those features, you test it out, and then you're able to ship it. And so the more efficient system that you have it, better prepared you are, you always have the less lag time between when you complete the feature, when you've done the work, versus when your customers or when your users are able to see the feature. So that is one. And the second thing is like, there is no easy answer whether, how I can take, all, 50 of them, one go. So typically the process that I have followed in my experience is, you always analyze each and every feature by their sizing. And so like, what I used to follow is something like that, the t-shirt sizing, like, so, every feature has a, some kind of, the small, medium, and the large, size allocated for it. And then, there is just some kind of rough estimate that you come up. And depending on, the resource availability, you come up with, these overall, the capacity that is needed for the feature. And you just go back to the product manager and you just make a call. You have this healthy conversation that, there is something that has to give up for the other features to come in, and you just end up prioritizing those features based on the capacity that you have.
One thing I try to look for as an engineering leader, and this is why I think it's important for engineering leaders to have a deep understanding of the product and the domain, is to look for those features that have high leverage, where maybe building one feature makes it so you don't have to build other features, or it makes it easier to build other features, where there's a story where there's a snowball effect of doing one thing first makes it easier to do other things down the line, or allows you to cut some corners and not have to do some other things down the line while keeping the value of the product high. I think where I've been most valuable is having enough insight both into the engineering and the product and the domain to see around those corners and to save the team a lot of work by just orchestrating the feature development in a way that makes sense as a story front to back, where you're building value in a kind of exponential way rather than a linear way where each feature delivers the same amount of value.
That's fair. That's fair. Michael has a question. I don't know if you want to jump in, Michael, and ask your question, or you can type it in chat.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for this webinar. I've learned so much. Yeah, just want based on Rishi from Sapient said. He mentioned that like when you have any feature, you try to look at it in a t-shirt or like small or large size in terms of like looking beyond the present. That's correct, right? So, but there are sometimes that you get to have some features from product managers and they are quite very uh, big. Like, hello.
There's
Yeah,
some
Michael, sorry, a little
background
bit of
noise.
background noise. Sounds like you're in a coffee shop or something. Michael, you still there? I think we may have lost him.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. So you were saying that Rishi's
Okay.
example of a t-shirt size for features, go for it.
Yes, that you think of features as small or large size, and says that you look at it in a view of what could be added more in a comprehensive and much more standard way, or like beyond just what is required. So I was not saying that looking it in that sense, or there are some times that we have like requests or tickets from product managers, and it's something that it comes with urgency. So how do you deal with that? And also, when I joined, I met Mark was talking about libraries and like staying up to date with the current libraries. There are sometimes that you've seen it in maybe when new libraries are released in the latest version, there are some sort of like maybe bugs or things that are not backward compatible with what you've already written. So how would that be handled? Like, what's the advice for that?
Yeah, I think, if I understood the question, so yeah, I think sometimes the feature at the face value look different and there could be underlying complexity in the feature. And you can be surprised, as you go on and you start executing it. And I think that's where I think the experience comes into play. Some of the experienced engineer can do a better job. But with said so, I think even they can be wrong. And it's really important that when you are working with the product management, you have the right culture in place. The people who are involved, the stakeholders who are involved, they're always in loop. And if at all you're following this agile methodology, then you're always communicating, how you're making progress. If there are some new things, new surprises, or maybe sometimes your surprise, those features comes out maybe easier than you had originally planned. So there is always a room, for the features to be a bit smaller than what you anticipated, or probably more complex than that. In regards to the other things, that you mentioned, and maybe Mark probably could answer that, but the libraries is something, I I always take as the balanced measure. And so, if there is a newer version of the library, probably, I would not typically jump right away. And I'll try to upgrade it. But at the same time, if you just leave it for too long, then that can become a massive technical debt. Just think of like the scenario. The whole world has moved towards the microservices. The whole world has moved towards the Docker container. And if you're still operating in the monolithic world, if you haven't made a significant progress there, then that itself can become a major roadblock for you to innovating further. So there is a guarded measure that you make. As an engineer, you might be excited to jump right away and try to upgrade every damn library immediately, but many times that can be a wasted effort, and probably you as a team can be a lot more efficient on that. Mark, you want to add anything?
Yeah. If you think about it in terms of like your engineering budget, in terms of time and money, you're going to have to spend a certain amount of that budget on keeping up to date on critical security fixes. That's where your hand is kind of forced, especially if you're in an environment where you have to pass certain compliance standards like PCI or SOC 2. So it's kind of like save your effort for those if you can, because they're going to be forced on you. And then I have found luck with, for me, I like doing the big upgrades actually reasonably few and far between. Like concretely, I was on Rails 4 for years up until probably a few months ago on Makaru. And I jumped all the way to the current version of Rails. I forget what that is, whether it's 7 or 8. So it was like a day and a half of severe pain, but that's not too bad, for having years of no distractions and being able to work on features and things that are valuable, to just be able to isolate myself for a day and a half and get it through up to the latest version. So I found that it works for me. I think the advice that I would add broadly is when you're considering an upgrade, try to understand whether for what reason you feel like you need to do it, whether it's a peer pressure type of thing of staying current and keeping people happy, or whether it's a thing that makes life more sustainable, makes your application better, makes it safer, and try to steer away from those decisions that are more peer pressure based.
And I think software engineers are very quickly falling victim, or at least in their early stages of their career, they do fall victim to that peer pressure, which is I want to work on the latest and greatest and coolest tools, but you have to understand, and every engineer goes through this maturation in their evolution of their career, which is they realize that as much as you love the art of software engineering, it is a means to an end. And so you have to start to learn how to make those critical trade-offs.
Yeah, and the trade-off, if you're an empathetic leader, you'll have people coming and going all the time today in software. People don't stay at companies for very long. So you can run into a situation where you have a great person come in that you have deep respect for, and you want to try to make them happy and have them have a good first impression. And where they were coming from, they were on a newer stack than what you have. And so there's that initial like, oh boy, this is embarrassing. But you can counterbalance that with, if you can manage to have as few moving parts as possible in your stack and have things be consistent, even if they're consistently behind, but they're consistent and done the same way across the entire software platform, that is a major added bonus that is way better than having some parts of a thing be shiny and new while some parts of a thing are embarrassingly old and you never know what you're working with on a given day. So think about that as a way that you can also present your employees with a nice reality of having things at least be consistent from module to module, application to application.
Just to add on to that, I think I have worked at some of the largest enterprises, and there has been a scenario where there is an unwritten rule that you don't necessarily you want to be on the latest and the greatest version of this libraries, because there is always a bit of surprise left. You don't necessarily know everything that comes with the latest library, and in fact, don't have plenty of resources online or in the community because it's so new. And so the enterprises often, they are a bit behind, and it's done on purpose just to mitigate the risk associated with it.
I don't know if you guys heard that thunder outside, but it looks like there's a lightning storm coming in, and I'm in San Diego, which is very unusual for us.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. I know we went over time, but I'm gonna go ahead and try to cut it off at 10:30 on the dot. So I appreciate everyone for joining. This is going to be recorded, so we'll place it online. Everyone can access it if you want to access it again. Otherwise, if you have questions, please reach out. Help@Sapient.ai, mark@mockcrew.com. Thank you again. Keep an eye out for the next topic coming out pretty soon. Love these workshops. They're interactive, so please join, bring in questions. You can, like I said, ask your question in the chat, or you can join in on the conversation. Thank you, Rishi and Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Amit, for hosting it. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good Wednesday. Bye.